The words exploded from my mouth before I could stop them. You had 37 years to tell me the truth. I hurled the DNA test results across my mother's dining room table, watching them scatter like the pieces of my shattered identity. The elegant chandelier that had witnessed countless family dinners now illuminated the worst moment of my life. Isabella, por favor, let me explain. My mother reached for my hand across the antique wooden table that had been in our family for generations. A family that wasn't mine. I jerked away, knocking over the cup of café con leche she'd prepared just moments before. Don't touch me. I don't even know who you are anymore. The rich coffee spread across the table like the lies that had seeped into every corner of my existence. 37 years of deception. 3 decades of stories about how I had my father's eyes, my grandmother's smile, all fabrications. The San Antonio sunshine streamed through the windows of my childhood home in the historic district, catching dust particles dancing in the air. How fitting! My entire life was nothing but dust and illusion. We were going to tell you, my mother whispered, tears streaming down her weathered face. But the time was never right. I laughed bitterly. The time was never right. When exactly is the right time to tell someone they're not who they thought they were? My hands trembled as I clutched my purse. The DNA test and background search had been a whim, a fun holiday gift to trace our Latino heritage back to Spain. Instead, it had detonated my entire world. We loved you from the moment we held you, my mother pleaded. Blood doesn't make a family, Isabella. Love does. Don't you dare, I hissed through clenched teeth. Don't you dare use love to justify lying to me my entire life. I turned to leave, but my mother's desperate voice stopped me. Por favor, Mia. Please, let's pray about this together. Jesus can heal. Jesus. I spun around, fury rising like a tidal wave. Where was Jesus when you were lying to me every single day? Where was he when you let me believe I was someone I'm not? The crucifix that hung on the wall seemed to watch me with sorrowful eyes. I'd grown up kneeling before it, believing in a God who valued truth above all else. I trusted you, I whispered, my voice breaking, and I trusted him. The wooden floor creaked beneath my feet as I moved toward the door. The same floor I'd danced across during countless family gatherings, celebrating a heritage that wasn't mine. Isabella, please, my mother begged. Stay. We can work through this together. Pride surged through me like wildfire. There is no together anymore. You're not my mother. This isn't my home. I don't even know who I am. I slammed the door behind me, the sound echoing through the historic house like a gunshot. Outside, the familiar streets of San Antonio's historic district suddenly felt foreign. The river walk, where I'd spent countless evenings strolling with my family, now mocked me with its cheerful lights. The Spanish colonial architecture that had always filled me with pride now felt like another lie. I collapsed onto a bench overlooking the water, my chest heaving with sobs I couldn't control. Tourists passed by, averting their eyes from my breakdown. God, I whispered. Why? Why would you let me live a lie for 37 years? I pulled out my phone, scrolling through photos of family celebrations, Christmases, birthdays, graduations. Who were these people to me now? Who was I to them? The sun began to set over the San Antonio skyline, casting long shadows across the water. I'd always found peace in these moments, watching day turn to night. Now, I felt only emptiness. Jesus, I whispered, the name feeling strange on my lips after my outburst. I don't know if I can forgive this. I don't know if I want to. A text message illuminated my screen. My mother, Isabella. Please come home. No matter what that test says, you are our daughter. Our love for you is stronger than blood or DNA. I nearly hurled my phone into the river. How dare she invoke love now? How dare she claim God's approval for decades of deception? Yet something held me back, a whisper so faint I almost missed it beneath my rage. I know who you are, not my mother's voice, not my own. I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face. Who am I then? Tell me who I am if everything I've known is a lie. The evening breeze carried the scent of jasmine from nearby gardens. In that moment of brokenness, I felt something I hadn't expected, a presence settling beside me on that lonely bench. You are mine. 3 simple words, but they penetrated deeper than any DNA test could reach. I opened my Bible app with trembling fingers, searching for anything to anchor me. My eyes fell on Psalm 139, You have searched me, Lord, and you know me. You knit me together in my mother's womb. Mother, the word stung, but the next verse caught my breath. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made by him, known by him, regardless of whose blood ran through my veins. I stood up, wiping tears from my face. Jesus knew who I was, even when I didn't. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to take the first step home. How did I get here? 3 months earlier, life had seemed so wonderfully predictable. San Antonio's historic district was more than just my home. It was the backdrop to a life I had carefully cultivated, rich with traditions passed down through what I believed were generations of my family. Morning sunlight would filter through the stained glass windows of our kitchen, casting colorful shadows across the tile floor my father had installed when I was just a girl. I remember tracing those rainbow patterns with my bare feet, feeling connected to something larger than myself. Isabella, you have your grandmother's hands, my mother would often say as I helped her prepare tamales for Christmas. Strong hands meant for creating beautiful things. I'd smile, taking pride in these small inheritances. My grandmother's hands, my father's stubborn chin, my mother's dark eyes that crinkled at the corners when she laughed. These physical connections anchored me to my past and gave me confidence about who I was in the present. My faith, too, was deeply entwined with my culture. Our Lady of Divine Providence watched over our family from her place of honor in our living room. We attended Mass together every Sunday, and my confirmation was a family celebration, rivaled only by my quinceañera. God has blessed our family with such a faithful daughter, my father had said that day, his voice thick with emotion. I remember feeling so secure in his love, so certain of my place in this world and in God's plan. I took such pride in showing visitors around our neighborhood, pointing out the buildings where my ancestors had worked and worshipped. My great-grandfather helped lay the stones for that church, I'd say, or my grandmother used to sell her embroidery in that market square. These stories formed the tapestry of my identity. I was a proud Latina woman, carrying forward traditions passed down through generations. My identity was secure, my place in the world certain, until that letter arrived. It came on an ordinary Tuesday, mixed in with bills and advertisements. The return address was unfamiliar, a government office I'd never had dealings with before. I almost set it aside to open later, but something compelled me to tear it open right there at the kitchen table. The first paragraph seemed routine, bureaucratic, but as my eyes moved down the page, the world began to tilt beneath me. Information about a birth certificate, references to adoption records, words like biological parents, and sealed documents jumped out at me. I read it 3 times, my hands shaking more violently with each reading. This had to be a mistake, some clerical error, a letter meant for someone else that had found its way into my mailbox instead. But my name was there, my birth date, details that couldn't be coincidental. The truth unleashed a storm I couldn't control. I confronted my elderly parents that evening, watching their faces crumple with guilt and fear. Through tears they confessed, I had been adopted as an infant, my biological parents unknown. They had kept it secret, believing it was best for me to feel fully part of our family, without the complications of divided loyalty or identity. We loved you from the moment we saw you, my mother whispered, reaching for my hand. I pulled away, unable to process the touch of someone who suddenly felt like a stranger. You've lied to me my entire life, I said, my voice hollow with disbelief. Every story, every family tradition, it was all a lie. No, Isabella, my father pleaded. The love was real, is real. You are our daughter in every way that matters. But I couldn't hear them through the roaring in my ears. Their revelation sent me into a tailspin. I began questioning everything, every family tradition, every physical trait I thought I'd inherited, every story about when you were born. The mirror became my enemy as I searched my face for clues to my true origins. Who were these features really reflecting? The nose I thought came from my father's side, was it actually from some stranger I'd never met? The talent for music I'd attributed to my mother's family, was that a coincidence or something written in DNA I knew nothing about? I stopped attending Mass. What was the point? The God I'd trusted had allowed me to live a lie. My prayers felt hollow, bouncing back from a ceiling that suddenly seemed very low and very solid. Jesus still knows who you are, my mother said when she called to check on me. I hung up without responding. Pride had made me blind. I had built my identity on shifting sand, family heritage, cultural traditions, the certainty of blood connections. Now everything was washing away with each new question that had no answer. I didn't realize then that Jesus was already working, already preparing the ground for a new foundation, one built not on blood or heritage or family names, but on something far more enduring. In my anger and confusion, I couldn't see that this crisis wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter where I would discover who I truly was and whose I truly was. But first, I had to lose myself completely. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The face looking back at me felt like a stranger's. Who was Isabella now? Days blurred together as I withdrew from everyone. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from extended family, their concerned texts only deepening my wounds. They kept insisting nothing has changed, but how could they not see? Everything had changed. Weeks after the revelation, I found myself wandering through Market Square, where vendors sold colorful crafts celebrating our Latino heritage. I used to feel such pride here. Now I questioned if any of this culture was truly mine to claim. ¿Está bien, señora?" asked an elderly vendor, as I stood frozen before a display of hand-painted tiles. I nodded mechanically and walked away. Was I still allowed to speak Spanish? Did I even deserve to be here? By the third week, I had stopped answering calls from anyone. The isolation felt safer than facing questions I couldn't answer. My home, once filled with laughter and music, grew silent as I pulled away from my husband and children. "Isabella, please talk to me," my husband would plead at night, his hand reaching across the growing void between us in our bed. I would turn away, unable to explain how I felt betrayed by my own skin, my own name, my own memories. 1 month after the letter arrived, I discovered a liquor store 3 neighborhoods away, where no one knew me. The burn of tequila became my new comfort. Late into the night, I would drink alone in our garage, scrolling through ancestry websites, searching desperately for any connection to my biological parents. Just one clue, I would whisper to the screen, just one thread to follow. But each search led nowhere, each dead end pushing me deeper into despair. 6 weeks in, my husband found me passed out surrounded by printed genealogy charts. The hurt in his eyes cut through my numbness briefly, but not enough to stop my spiral. "This isn't you, Isabella," he said, helping me to bed. "That's exactly the problem," I slurred. "I don't know who I am anymore." 2 months after everything fell apart, I reached out to Father Marcos, hoping the church might offer some guidance. He listened patiently as I poured out my confusion in his office, the crucifix on the wall seeming to watch me with judgment. "God has a purpose in all things," Father Marcos assured me. "Your identity is in Christ, not in your bloodline." I nodded, desperate to believe him. For 3 days I clung to his words like a lifeline. Then came Sunday service. As I sat in the pew, I overheard Father Marcos speaking with another parishioner about my situation. "Poor Isabella," he said, "completely lost without her heritage. Pray for her identity crisis." The betrayal cut deep. Even my confession had become gossip. I walked out mid-service, never to return. 3 months in, I found myself driving to a hotel across town, a suitcase in my trunk, and tears streaming down my face. My husband had finally reached his breaking point. "Come back when you find yourself," he had said, his voice breaking. "Our children need their mother, not this shell you've become." That night, alone in a hotel room that smelled of industrial cleaner, I opened the minibar and methodically emptied every tiny bottle. The room spun as I scrolled through photos on my phone, family gatherings, birthdays, holidays, wondering if any of it had been real. I stumbled to the bathroom, catching my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot, my face puffy from crying and drinking. "Quien soy?" I sobbed, sliding down to the cold tile floor. "Who am I?" The question that had haunted me for months now crushed me with its weight. Without my family history, I felt like a ghost, present but not real. In that moment of complete brokenness, as I huddled on the bathroom floor of a cheap hotel room, a strange thought pierced through my drunken haze. I had built my entire identity around my heritage, my family name, my cultural traditions, everything except the one relationship that couldn't be taken from me. Jesus, I whispered, my voice cracking in the empty bathroom. It wasn't a prayer yet, just his name on my lips. But somehow, in that moment, it felt like the first honest thing I'd said in months. The ceiling fan in my rented room spun lazily overhead, casting long shadows across unfamiliar walls. Months since the truth had shattered everything, and here I was, alone in a small hotel, as far from home as my heart had traveled from faith. Night had fallen hours ago, but sleep refused to come. I stared at the water stain on the ceiling, shaped oddly like the state of Texas. How ironic. Even this room seemed to mock my fractured identity. My phone lay silent beside me. I'd stopped answering calls days ago. What was there to say? Hello, this is Isabella, the woman who just discovered her entire life was fabricated. The rosary beads my mother had given me for my quinceañera lay coiled on the nightstand like a sleeping snake. I couldn't touch them. What right did I have to them now? The cultural traditions that once brought me comfort now felt like borrowed clothes that didn't fit. Even my prayers, when I attempted them, felt foreign on my tongue. Dios mío, I whispered to the darkness, my voice breaking. Where are you now? Silence answered. Even the traffic outside had quieted. I slid from the bed to my knees, not in prayer but in collapse. The carpet scratched against my skin as I pressed my forehead to the floor. The position felt familiar, yet everything else felt strange. I have nothing left, I whispered. Nothing. My identity, gone. My family history, a fiction. My faith hanging by the thinnest thread. I thought of the home I'd fled from, the walls lined with family photos that now felt like exhibits in a museum of lies. The smell of my mother's cooking, that had once been home, but now seemed like cultural appropriation. Rain began to patter against the window, soft at first, then with growing insistence, like tears I could no longer shed. I'd cried myself empty days ago. In my darkest hour, when I had nothing left, I remembered something my abuela used to say. Tu identidad no está en tu sangre, sino en tu corazón. Your identity isn't in your blood but in your heart. Though I now knew she wasn't my biological grandmother, her wisdom reached across the chasm of my pain. I crawled to the edge of the bed and pulled open the drawer of the nightstand. The hotel Bible sat there, untouched like in countless rooms before. My hands trembled as I took it out, the thin pages crinkling under my fingers. How long had it been since I'd opened scripture? Months. The Bible fell open to Ephesians, as if guided by unseen hands. For he chose us in him before the creation of the world. Chose us, like my parents had chosen me. I read the words again, my vision blurring. Something stirred within me, not comfort exactly, but recognition. A truth deeper than biology. Outside lightning flashed, illuminating the room in stark white. In that brief moment of clarity, I saw myself as I truly was, not defined by DNA or family trees, but by something more eternal. Jesus, I whispered, the name feeling both strange and familiar on my lips. I don't know who I am anymore. The words hung in the air, raw and honest. For the first time since the revelation, I wasn't performing grief or anger. I was simply being. But you know who I am, I continued, my voice gaining strength. You've always known. The Bible trembled in my hands as I read further. In love he predestined us for adoption to sonship through Jesus Christ. Adoption. The word I'd been running from now appeared as divine intention. I slid back to my knees, this time in deliberate prayer. Jesus, I've lost everything. My family, my history, my sense of place in this world. Lightning flashed again, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the foundations of the building. I'm afraid, I admitted, both to myself and to God. I'm afraid that without those things, there's nothing left of me. Rain lashed against the window as I waited in the silence that followed, not for an audible voice, but for something I couldn't yet name. Isabella. I spoke my own name aloud, testing it like an unfamiliar word. Is that even who I am? And then, in the quiet between thunderclaps, a thought formed with such clarity, it might as well have been spoken. Before you were Isabella, to anyone on earth, You were mine. Not audible words, but truth penetrating the armor of my pain. I reached for the rosary beads, feeling their familiar weight. They were still mine to hold, my prayers still mine to offer. Jesus, I whispered, if you can remake me, if you can help me find who I really am beyond all this, I surrender. The storm outside began to ease, though the one within me had only begun to shift. This wasn't a moment of instant healing. My questions remained, my pain still raw. In acknowledging my complete emptiness before Christ, I'd found the beginning of a foundation that couldn't be shaken by DNA tests or family secrets. I crawled back into bed, Bible still clutched to my chest. For the first time in weeks, sleep came, not because my problems were solved, but because I'd finally stopped facing them alone. The San Antonio sun was setting over the historic district, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple as I wandered aimlessly through streets I once loved. 3 months had passed since discovering I wasn't my parents' biological child, and the revelation had hollowed me out completely. My obsession with finding my real identity had cost me everything that truly mattered. I found myself sitting on a bench in a small plaza, watching families stroll by, children laughing, parents smiling, the simple joy of belonging, something I'd taken for granted my entire life until it shattered in my hands. Is this seat taken? I looked up to see an elderly Latino woman with kind eyes. I shook my head, and she settled beside me with a gentle sigh. We sat in silence for a while, watching the world go by. You look lost, Mia, she finally said, her voice warm like the evening air. Not just on the outside. Something about her grandmotherly presence broke through my walls. Before I knew it, I was telling this stranger my story, how my whole identity had collapsed when I learned I wasn't biologically related to the people who raised me, how I'd pushed away everyone who loved me in my desperate search for answers. I don't even know who I am anymore, I confessed, wiping away tears. Every mirror shows a stranger. The woman nodded slowly. I understand, believe me. She turned to face me. 40 years ago, I did something terrible, something that destroyed my family. When I finally faced what I'd done, I couldn't recognize myself anymore. She described her journey through addiction, how she'd betrayed those who loved her most. I was certain God Himself couldn't forgive me, she said. But Jesus met me in that darkness. He showed me that my identity wasn't in my failures, or even in my family name. It was in being His child. Her words penetrated my heart, like gentle rain on parched soil. How did you find your way back? I whispered. I stopped running, she said simply. I stopped trying to fix myself, and just gave everything to Jesus. My pain, my questions, my future. As twilight deepened around us, this stranger shared how Christ had restored what seemed beyond repair in her life. Jesus didn't just forgive me, she explained. He gave me a new identity altogether, not based on perfection or performance, or even blood relations, but on His unconditional love and righteousness. For months I'd been searching frantically for roots, for belonging, for some DNA connection that would tell me who I really was. But what if I'd been looking in all the wrong places? When I feel lost now, the woman continued, I don't run to old escapes anymore. I run straight to Jesus. He's the only identity that can never be taken away. After she left, I remained on that bench as stars appeared overhead. For the first time since my world imploded, I felt a glimmer of hope, not because I had answers, but because maybe the answers I'd been seeking weren't the ones I actually needed. Jesus, I prayed, my voice barely audible. I've been searching for my identity in all the wrong places. I am yours before I am anyone else's. That revelation changed everything. The weight I'd been carrying for months began to lift. In Christ, I had an unshakable identity that transcended blood relations. The next morning, I called my parents, the only parents who mattered, and asked if I could come over. When they opened the door, their faces showed surprise and cautious hope. We sat in their familiar living room, where I'd grown up surrounded by love. I'm sorry, I said, tears flowing freely. Thank you for choosing me, for loving me as your own. You are my real parents, the ones who stayed, who sacrificed, who loved me through everything. My mother reached for my hands, her eyes glistening. Isabella, You have always been our daughter. Nothing could ever change that. In that moment of reconciliation, I felt Jesus present among us, healing wounds I thought would never close. The questions about my biological origins didn't disappear. They just no longer defined me. Over the following weeks, I began rebuilding what my identity crisis had broken. Starting with my husband and children, I learned to run to Jesus instead of spiraling into anxiety when uncertainty arose. Walking through the historic district with my husband and children feels different. These streets remind me not of what I lost, but of where I was found. Christ restored what seemed beyond repair and showed me that family isn't defined by blood, but by love. Today, when people ask who I am, I smile with confidence. I am Isabella, daughter of the King, loved beyond measure, chosen twice. In Christ, I finally know who I am.